This is one of the craziest weekends of college football that I can ever remember watching in my life. Michigan loses to Texas at home in embarrassing fashion. Northern Illinois goes down to South Bend, upsets Notre Dame, and many other really close upsets. Alabama was they were on upset alert until they ended up having a pretty big fourth quarter. Oregon narrowly goes down to Boise State. A lot happened this weekend, and it's been a crazy weekend in my personal life. I got married yesterday, so that's been crazy. But college football did not disappoint this weekend, and we're going to be going through my winners and losers of the week, something that we are going to be doing each and every week here on the channel. If you guys are new, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Really helps me out, lets me know you guys are enjoying the videos. Without further ado, let's take a look at the first big winner of the week. That is going to go to Quinn Ewers. Ewers was really dominant in this Michigan game today, and looks like he could be the player that many people thought. A lot of the concerns about Ewers has been the deep ball accuracy, which still hasn't really come together yet. But the other concern with him was his mobility in the pocket. He looked stiff at times. His footwork didn't look great. And today, his ability to step up in the pocket, keep his eyes downfield, and make all of these off-platform throws was really remarkable. On top of that, we know he's a good athlete. He's got the arm talent, the arm strength, and the accuracy, and that was on display. There were a few passes here and there that were errant and that got out of his way, but in a quarterback class that is starting to look more and more wide open, especially at that QB2 spot, I think Carson Beck has kind of secured that QB1 spot, and we didn't talk about him in this video, but he was incredible today. 5 touchdowns. I think he had like 6 incompletions. But Quinn Ewers really impressed today against a Michigan team that has NFL talent on that defense. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, and Will Johnson, all elite talents at their respective positions. And Quinn Ewers lit them up. They win 31-12 in the big house, and Ewers was fantastic, and he's a player that did move up my board a little bit, jumping into my QB7 spot. But if he keeps playing like this, Quinn Ewers will play himself into a first-round pick. There's no doubt in my mind. He was incredible today. The first big loser for me was Notre Dame. Now, this was the first game of the day that I had kind of really tuned into, and we didn't really talk about any Northern Illinois players. The MAC had a really interesting day. Bowling Green, we'll talk about them a little bit later, but Bowling Green had themselves a really interesting game against Penn State, but Notre Dame at home, the home opener here against a Northern Illinois team that is coming off a pretty good week one. They're 1-0. This was an embarrassing showing from the Fighting Irish. Not only did they just look absolutely terrible defensively, offensively, Riley Leonard looked like the player we saw at Duke last year. Horrible decision making. The throws were all over the field. I think Chris Mitchell he was a transfer player that they brought in from FIU that I really liked. He was a top 20 receiver for me. He had some horrible drops in this game, just bad body control. The offensive line, I know it's young, it's inexperienced. There was really nothing going for Notre Dame, but I think the most frustrating part was the fact that this is a defense that was really, really good last week. They were clicking on all cylinders. The interior was stopping the run. The linebackers were getting involved, and the secondary looked amazing. Northern Illinois really didn't have to pass the ball today because Notre Dame could not stop the rushing attack of Northern Illinois. Even when Ontario Brown went down, who had a hell of a game today, when he went down, Northern Illinois was still able to run the ball. They were able to do the read option. This is a Notre Dame team that had one of the easiest schedules in college football. You looked at it, the Texas A&M game and USC, those are the 2 hardest matchups. They went into College Station, got the upset, and everyone's like, okay, this is a Notre Dame team that has a real shot at the college football playoff. With a loss like this now on your resume, not being a conference team, you already are playing against that for the college football playoff. I think this is detrimental to Notre Dame's playoff hopes because if they want to get an at-large bid, you're going to go over strength of schedule, who had the worst loss. This is going to more than likely be the biggest upset of the college football season. And I just really think this is going to hurt Notre Dame. On top of that, you really question if this is a team that can get to that next level. They lost to Marshall a few years ago. They now have this loss. And this is a team that just seems to, every year, they have big expectations. The lights seem to always be too bright for Notre Dame, and was very embarrassed by the performance they put on today. Another winner for me was Kyle McCord, a player that I was pretty low on coming into the year, as was everybody. He was not good at Ohio State last year. Even with playmakers all around him, he just was really inconsistent. The accuracy, the ball placement was everywhere. And in 2 weeks at Syracuse, he has been lights out. I believe he had over 350 yards again today, 3 touchdowns in a win against Georgia Tech, a team that looked like they could have a really successful season. Syracuse is another really interesting team. The ACC looks wide open right now. Syracuse is a 2-0 football team because of Kyle McCord. He has been very good, slinging the ball all 3 levels, making good decisions. He's been accurate with the football, and they're winning football games. This is a Syracuse team that, with Fran Brown, has been consistently pretty successful. And when Kyle McCord went here, I said I wouldn't be surprised if this team has a really solid season. You look at the talent, you got Aronde Gadsden back, who's been very good for this team. The defense is playing well. Kyle McCord is a player that a lot of the expectations were really high for him coming out of high school. He's obviously replacing CJ Stroud. He didn't perform at Ohio State, but now he's in this Syracuse system and he looks fantastic, and looks like if this could continue trending in the right direction, he could put himself in the Heisman consideration. I've been really impressed with what he's done. He was a big winner of the weekend for me. Another loser for me is the Michigan Wolverines, a team that I flirted with the idea of dropping them out of the top 25 altogether, and they still did sneak into my top 25. They are at the bottom, though. This is a Michigan team coming off a national championship where the expectations were still there. They returned quite a bit of talent, particularly on the defensive side of the football. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Will Johnson. They brought in some players in the transfer portal. You expected Donovan Edwards to have a big year. Colston Loveland has high expectations. Loveland has been one of the most impressive players for this team on a team that has been an absolute disaster so far this season. Narrowly escaping Fresno State in a game that they should have won in a blowout fashion. Now you go host Texas in your building, a building where you haven't lost. You had the longest win streak in the country. I expected Texas to win this game. I thought they were the better team. Michigan should not have lost the game in the way that they did. An absolute embarrassment on their home turf. This offense was abysmal. They couldn't run the ball. The passing was so terrible. Davis Warren was a joke, and they have to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback, because Alex Orji, they just don't want to let him throw for whatever reason. And then Warren, this is a team that just has zero consistency in this quarterback room right now. They can't establish the run game because Donovan Edwards doesn't look very good. And there's just so many concerns about this Michigan offense right now. The offensive line hasn't been good. The playmakers aren't showing up. And even those NFL stars, Mason Graham, they haven't played the way that you expect them to. This was an absolute disaster for Michigan. And, you know, the resume, the championship pedigree is still there. But I think it's going to be really hard for them to get in the playoffs. When you look at their schedule, they still have some brutal matchups coming up. You still got to play Washington down the road, who flirted into my top 25 consideration. They didn't quite make it, but they were right in the mix. You still got to play a team like Ohio State. You still got to play Oregon. And you still got to play, like, there's a few other teams there that, like, Illinois, Indiana, both those teams look pretty good. This could be a really rough year for Michigan, and they were a massive loser of the weekend for me. Another winner for me this weekend was Jaylen Noel from Iowa State. Iowa State goes in to Ames and pulls off the upset, ends up bumping into my top 25 as a result. And you could go a few different ways, but Jaylen Noel almost made it last week. A primarily slot weapon at Iowa State that has been very productive for this team the last couple of years. Had the big catch late that kind of helped put the Cyclones in field goal range. Really exciting player, quick athlete, and he's been very productive for this team. I don't have his numbers off the top of my head, but he was very productive at over 100 receiving yards and was the best receiver for Iowa State. I know a lot of people like Jaden Higgins a little bit more. Jalen Noel, I don't know if he's going to translate so well to the NFL as Higgins will, but really good player, really shifty, great slot weapon. And I thought he had a really good week this week. He was a big winner for me. Another loser for me was Shedeur Sanders, and a player that I had as my QB2. I'm going to kind of look a little bit more into the film here, but I don't think he's going to be the QB2 after this week. It was a terrible, terrible performance from him. I don't even know where to begin. We could talk about him walking off the field early. It's a bad character look, and I know I don't like to read into character too much, but that just shows bad sportsmanship, and I never like to see that, even though, I've talked about it on this channel a number of times. I grew up in the Colorado area. I'm rooting for this team to succeed. I like the Sanders quite a bit. I know I'm in the minority. That's something you never want to see, no matter who you are. But I think the biggest concern for me was the decision making. Now, granted, this offensive line didn't do him any favors whatsoever. They couldn't protect him. I don't even know. I know we got sacked like 5 times in the first half. They couldn't protect him. He was under pressure pretty much the entire game. But it wasn't that. It was him, just his inaccuracy all over the field. Last year, when he was under pressure, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He looked calm. He looked collected. He didn't make bad reads. Early in this game, it was just rough. You see it on the interception to Tommy Hill. He rushes that read. It's a late throw, under pressure, into coverage. You got to be able to make a smarter decision in that moment. And Sanders' decision-making wasn't there. The arm talent was really apparent that it just wasn't there today either. When you look at some of these other quarterbacks, you'll look at Cam Ward, who's absolutely dominating right now. Jackson Dart is playing out of his mind. We talked about Quinn Ewers. Drew Aller continues to raise. Sanders' stock is dropping because the other quarterbacks are coming to play. And he was terrible tonight against a Nebraska team that I thought was absolutely remarkable. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but really bad performance from Shedeur Sanders, and I do think this is going to hurt his draft stock ultimately. And Colorado as a team just was brutal tonight. Another winner for me is going to be Dante Corleone. This is just an incredible story. A guy that just in June had blood clots in his lungs, was out indefinitely. We didn't know when he'd be able to play, was cleared to play again on Friday. He comes in today at Pitt. And while they didn't win this game, his presence was felt on the field. He had a sack in this game. He was a presence on the interior of that Cincinnati defensive line. That's a big deal. And I think that is a piece for Cincinnati that's going to translate. But on the football field, Dante Corleone is a player that is very impressive. He's got great run defense. He can move a little bit. He's got some pass rush tools. He was a player that made my top 10 defensive tackles, was a player that made my top 10 defensive tackles last year. Really good player that Cincinnati's getting back on the football field that you love to see. You love to see these stories of him being healthy. And I'm happy that he is back, and we're going to get to see a little bit more of the Godfather. Another loser for me was Ollie Gordon. Now, I don't think this is going to drop him in terms of my running back rankings in any way, but really it was weird because he finished this game strong, had the 2-point conversion, had the ultimate touchdown that ended up putting Oklahoma State in the driver's seat in a game that I did tune into this game. There was no way they shouldn't have won this game. Arkansas was the better team today. This was a really strange performance, though, because Ollie Gordon, I believe, going into the double overtime period, had 9 carries for 19 yards in this game. They just didn't give him the ball. Then in overtime, they gave him the ball. He had a run, scored a touchdown. But he just wasn't getting the usage that he typically does. He wasn't really running the way we typically see him run. And that's something that did concern me a little bit. You're looking at guys like Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson who had good days. You're looking at Ashton Genty, who might have sealed up that RB1 spot today. Ollie Gordon didn't have a really great performance, and a player that a lot of people want to put in first-round conversations. I can't quite get there with him, and this is kind of why. There is still a lot of inconsistencies in his game, and he just didn't show up today, and that is something that I don't want to see. and he was a loser for the week for me. Harold Fannin Jr. is a player that I have loved since I turned on the tape. Everyone wants to give Kyle Pitts comparisons, and I like it. I can't lie. He is so athletic at the tight end position. He's going up against a really, really good Penn State team who absolutely dominated West Virginia. And early in this game, he was incredible. I want to say he had over 150 yards in this game, had a touchdown, was making plays happen left and right, and was Bazelak's number one target. You see, the most you're going to get out of a prospect is how does he play against the best competition? And Harold Fannin showed up against a really good Penn State team where they only lost by a touchdown. Really impressive showing from him. A player that has been one of my top players in this draft, a big my guy for me going into this class. He showed up and he showed out today for Bowling Green. Really excited to see what the future holds because he's so athletic, so good after the catch. And he's going to make a lot of plays this season for Bowling Green. Unfortunate loss for the Falcons, but I think he's going to bounce back. He had a great week one as well. He looks like he is climbing up draft boards rapidly. Another loser for me was Kentucky. This team was absolute garbage today. One of the worst games I have ever watched. Brock Vandegrift sucks. Like he looked abysmal on all levels today. Couldn't complete any passes. This team couldn't establish any run game. This is an offensive line that was absolutely terrible. I mean, there's a few players on this offensive line that I have studied. I like Gerald Mincey, Tennessee transfer. He's okay. I could have told you, Jagger Burton has no business starting for this team. The defense, though, couldn't stop South Carolina, who I believe they had their backup quarterback in this game, in Robbie Ashford, who somehow still is hanging around in college. Kentucky was just horrible today. 6 points against South Carolina, a team that is not good. They barely beat Old Dominion last week, and Kentucky just absolutely crapped the bed today. Horrible performance from a team that I liked. I thought that this team was going to exceed the win total. I believe it was like 7.5. I was like, there's a chance this team can get to 8 games, and that is not going to happen. And Kentucky was horrible today and a massive loser for me. Another winner for me, Henry Parish, the running back from Ole Miss. You were kind of curious going into this year. Was it going to be Ulysses Bentley or was it going to be Henry Parish coming to Ole Miss, transfer from Miami? And it looks like Parish is getting the trust of this team early on. Had 120 yards, 4 touchdowns in this game. Every time I looked up at this game, I had the quad box that YouTube TV offers. And every time I looked up at this game, oh, Henry Parish. It's Henry Parish again in the end zone. Oh, he's got another one. He was everywhere for this team. He was quick, made great cuts to the end zone, was getting into the backfield. Haven't studied a ton of his film yet, but he is on my radar as a player to definitely keep an eye out on. Ole Miss has done a pretty good job at producing running backs. Quinshaw Judkins, player that I like. Ulysses Bentley's been productive, and Henry Parish is another product of a very good run scheme there down in Oxford. Another loser for me of the week is Payton Thorne, one of the worst quarterback performances I saw all week. I mean, he just couldn't hit any throws. The accuracy was not there, and he was a player that I really didn't like coming into the year. I was like, he's one of my least favorite quarterback prospects. He's very inaccurate. The decision-making is not there, and that showed today against a Cal team that I've talked about quite a few times. I really like that Cal team, and I think they've got top 25 chances by next week if they can continue to win football games. But Payton Thorne can't be throwing interceptions in a double coverage the way he did. This is a game that I think Auburn had to win. They looked really, really good last week. People started to talk about them potentially being in the top 25 this week. And now there's no chance for this team. In a SEC that seems pretty loaded, Payton Thorne had to show up, and he was not good today. So a player that definitely, I think, continues to tank his draft stock and was a pretty bad week from Payton Thorne. Another winner for me this week was Caleb Johnson, the running back from Iowa. Iowa didn't end up winning this game, but Caleb Johnson was incredible in this game. I want to say he had over 180 yards in this game rushing, most of it being in the first half. They played very good football in the first half, and This is an Iowa team that we seem to go into every year like, okay, their offense is going to suck. They're not going to be able to put points on the board, but maybe they can run the ball and they'll have a good tight end. And Caleb Johnson looks pretty good for this team, a player that dealt with some injury history last year, was a player that I kind of had on my preliminary radar, but I was going to wait to see him get fully healthy. Definitely a player I have put the eyes on my draft board, which you guys can get exclusive access to by subscribing to the Patreon, which I'll leave linked below. But Caleb Johnson had a really, really good week. I believe he had over 185 yards, a touchdown on about 22, 23 carries, something like that. Really good showing from the young back, and this running back class continues to find new names. We talked about Henry Parish. We've talked about Jamal Haynes, now Caleb Johnson, and Ontario Brown, who didn't end up making this ultimate list. Really good week from him. Another loser this week was Jaylen Daniels, and a player that I was never the highest on, never really understood the hype. I get he's a really good athlete, had 2 touchdowns today, can make plays happen on his legs, but he's an older quarterback prospect who's dealt with an injury history, and he seems like he's a very scheme-specific type of guy. And when it comes to throwing the ball in the air, he is a one read and run type of quarterback. And he took on Illinois today, which last year against Illinois, one of the few games he was healthy in, he played really well. Tonight, really disappointing. Had 3 interceptions in this game to 2 touchdowns, completed nearly 50% of a little over 50% of his passes. Just inaccuracy concerns. And he's got weird mechanics for the quarterback position. Not really a guy I'm buying into right now. He was a player that I think hurt his draft stock a little bit, and definitely hurt to see that from him. Then we look at the final winner. That's going to be Tommy Hill, a player that I moved up pretty dramatically. I had him as the number 22 corner in the class, moved him up. He is now in the top 15. He's been incredible so far for Nebraska this season. This is a Nebraska team that I actually had pretty high hopes for coming into the year. They have lived up to those hopes, and it's because of the physicality that they bring on the defensive side of the football. Tommy Hill is a big corner with incredible length and really good athleticism, a wide receiver converted to corner. He's been remarkable so far. Had the interception, pick 6 early in this game against Shadur Sanders. Played pretty well on Travis Hunter in this game as well when they were matched up one-on-one. A player that has all the tools, and many people are saying could play himself into a first-round corner type of prospect. And I don't think that's so far-fetched from what we saw tonight. It's a cornerback class that is very deep, but there are a lot of spots that are kind of up for grabs right now. And I think Tommy Hill showed that he could be one of the top guys in this draft class. Taking a closer look now at the Heisman race, the updated Heisman race, the player that entered this race, well, there's 2. Quinn Ewers has jumped from out of this to the number 2 spot on this, and it's really just because Texas is now 2-0. He has been very good. I believe he had 1 interception in the first game. The accuracy, we talked about him earlier. But Cam Ward remains the top Heisman favorite, was incredible today. Once again, the arm talent was on full display, was incredibly accurate with the football, made good decisions, ran the ball, didn't run the ball a ton, but when he did, made good decisions, had the Superman touchdown. I'm all in on Miami this year. Cam Ward looks absolutely incredible. Jackson Dart remains in that number 3 spot. Ole Miss is winning football games. Dart is not putting the ball in harm's way. I think he's been very impressive. The only thing I might change here, I think Ashton Jeanty should be in that number 3 spot. The only problem is Boise State's now 1-1. He comes from the Mountain West, so he's not going to be playing against the best competition. But over 450 yards and 9 touchdowns through the first 2 weeks of the season is absolutely absurd. Ashton Jeanty's incredible. And I threw Miller Moss in here as well. Had a really good game last week against LSU. Was dicing that defense up. And then once again against Utah State has been very productive, moving the ball down the field. Hasn't really been putting the ball in danger, and seems like another product of a elite coaching system there that Lincoln Riley has. These are my top 5 candidates for the Heisman. Travis Hunter ended up dropping out of this race, as did Tetairoa McMillan. Now we're going to take a closer look at the teams that have dropped out of the top 25, and that is going to be these 4 teams here. NC State got absolutely dog-walked by Tennessee today. Looked absolutely horrible. The offense looked terrible. Concepcion, who was really good last week, just didn't show up today. They fall out. The Georgia Tech rise here kind of fell off. They lost to Syracuse. This is a team that you could kind of tell they weren't going to be up here for very long. I still think they could get back in this race by the end of the year. They're a solid football team. Kansas, we're kind of on the fringe for me anyways. You lose the game to Illinois, which I didn't really love. Jaylen Daniels didn't play great. And then Iowa, another team that I'm not really the highest on. I don't think this is as good of an Iowa team as we've seen in years prior. The offense, while it's a little bit better, they were kind of a fringe team. And I think there were some teams that really jumped up. So let's take a closer look at the top 25 here before we wrap this up. Sticking with the top, we'll go from the top to the bottom. The top 8 teams have remained the same. Georgia looked incredible against Tennessee Tech once again today. Carson Beck was everywhere. I believe he threw 5 touchdowns to 5 different receivers. Trevor Etienne is back. This team was the number 1 team in the country. Ohio State absolutely embarrassed Western Michigan. I don't think Western Michigan scored a point in this game. They looked incredible. The rushing attack was great. And Jeremiah Smith I considered putting him in the Heisman conversation because he's been that good. Ole Miss and Texas, really a 1A, 1B sort of thing for me. You could probably move Texas up. I had Ole Miss in this spot last week, and I didn't feel like Ole Miss did anything to drop their ranking. Texas had a big win against Michigan, but I think both those teams are really the same ranking for me. Alabama, this is a team that I consider dropping because they really didn't look good for 3.5 quarters against USF, and it looked like USF was going to pull off the upset. It was a 13-14 game at one point, didn't really end up meaning much, and Alabama ended up pulling off the win. Miami stays the same. This team's really, really good. I'm all in on them. Utah, Penn State, in some close battles, but ended up pulling off the win. And in the case of Penn State, was really impressed with how the offense finished this game, particularly on the ground. Nick Singleton, Trent Allen had big days. Now you look at some teams that have jumped up into the top 10, and it really falls because you had a few teams drop. You look here, Notre Dame, who was sitting in this number 9 spot, is now dropped down, as Michigan also drops down, who was in this number 10 spot. So 2 top 10 teams drop out, 2 come up. Number 1 is going to be Tennessee. Tennessee is my team here, and they were incredible tonight against NC State. While NC State is a team that I didn't think was going to be that much of a difficult opponent, they're still a ranked team. That's a game that is going to look good in the resume. Nico played a pretty solid game, had 2 interceptions, which you don't love to see, but the most impressive part of this Tennessee team is the defensive line that is playing incredible. They are in the backfield. This is the best Tennessee defensive line of the last few years. And then USC had a huge win against LSU, continues their dominance against Utah State, and really, really good show from Miller Moss yet again. Missouri, Kansas State, LSU all kind of jump up again because you had teams below them drop out. We'll talk about Oregon in a second. Missouri looked pretty good. Brady Cook, Theo Weiss kind of getting it done. Got them at number 11. Kansas State pulls off a really good win. This is a team that I feel like I've kind of disrespected. They have been in my top 25, but one of the best wins of the weekend for me. They looked really sharp. They had a big win against a good Tulane football team. Avery Johnson had a good one, but DJ Giddens was the MVP. LSU jumps up, and I know people are going to be like, how in the heck are you going to have LSU here? They had a really good second half. This is a really talented football team. Garrett Nussmeier played well, and they barely lost to USC last week. So, yeah, they're 1-1. This is one of the better 1-1 teams in the country right now. Their only loss is to a ranked opponent, and they've looked good in both of their games. So I do have them here still at number 13. And then at number 14, Oregon drops again. Oregon looked terrible against Boise State yet again. Clock management by Dan Lanning was a disaster. Dylan Gabriel had a couple of wide open shots, couldn't really get those down. I'm worried about Oregon, a team that I picked to be in the national championship game. They don't look good right now. Oklahoma comes up, beating Houston. Good win for the Sooners. I'm not really the highest on Oklahoma, but because you had other teams drop, I felt like it was justifiable. Nebraska jumps up from my number 25 team up to number 16. I was that impressed with what they did. The run game was incredible. Their nastiness in the trenches. This is a team that could easily be 7-0 going into their Ohio State game, as did Kirk Herbstreit say today. And this is a really, really good Nebraska team. Oklahoma State pulled off the win. They didn't move up. They didn't move down. I was a little disappointed by them. I considered moving them down, but it was a good enough win. Louisville continues to just beat up on their opponents. They move up. Another really good show from this team. Iowa State goes on the road, beats their biggest rival. In the Big 12, I mean, I think right now they are in that top 3-4 teams right now. They're playing really good football. Rocco Beck looks really good. They have a good wide receiver duo. The defense is playing well. Arizona didn't look good tonight. They really didn't. It looked like they might be on upset alert to Northern Arizona. End up pulling off a win, so I keep them at number 20, but I am worried about the Wildcats. Notre Dame, we talked about why they dropped. There's no surprise there. Still have them at number 21, but that might even, I wouldn't be shocked if they don't even get in the AP poll. Syracuse jumps into the top 25. They are 2-0. Kyle McCord's playing great football. This team's moving the ball. Clemson is back in the top 25. Cade Klubnik with maybe the best game of his collegiate career. They beat App State. The Florida State sort of thing doesn't look bad, but I mean, you lost to the number 1 team in the country. Give them the benefit of the doubt. They got them at 23. And then Boston College jumps into my number 24 spot. Thomas Castellanos looks incredible. Their running attack looks incredible. And Bill O'Brien's doing a really good job with this offense. So, and then Michigan rounds out the top 25. And that's the list right now. I think the only controversial thing here is going to be having LSU at 13 with a 1-1 record, but that only loss came to the number 10 team in the country. So we'll see kind of what you guys think, but we'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. That's going to do it for me. Leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.